Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are going to be going over what I am going to be cycle starting for 1.0, and that is going to be spoilers, Falconer net traps. So I was originally planning on cycle starting something like Warlock, but Perry and I decided that it would be funny if he went Warlock in COF and I went Falconer in the Merchant's Guild, not only to give me a better opinion on the Merchant's Guild in general when we talk about it on the podcast, but to also be kind of a foil so that when we actually talk about things on the podcast, we have significantly more things to talk about instead of if we were just both Warlock COF nerds. So overall, this will end up making that episode very interesting as we share our very different experiences when it comes to last Epoch 1.0. Now, when it comes to this build, this is going to be focused around net traps and puncture. So the idea here is, if we look in the skills here, net is a new skill that is coming with the Falconer addition to the video game. And the main reason why we like net so much is because of the net traps. So if we see here, we can throw a net trap. We have up to 6 net traps as well, right? And we can throw them around enemies to, of course, apply nets to them. And then whenever those net traps trigger, they also attack with puncture. Now, it says the trap uses puncture. This means that you probably won't gain a bloodthirst, although it says hits with puncture grant you bleeding flurry. So we might actually gain this buff, which will automate this buff, which is really cool. Lots of free bleed chance, by the way. But things like the frenzy and the mana gained on use probably won't work. Now, we do have these points allocated, and that is mainly because, net trap is actually going to cost us like 5 mana on average to throw with all of these additions, meaning that, of course, we are going to need some kind of way of sustaining mana, right? Yeah, we throw net traps, we deal more damage with puncture, right? We also deal more damage with net based on our dodge rating, which we can scale. We get a lot of bleed duration, more damage. We deal physical damage over time and bleed stacks per second. All of these additions mean that we can do a very large amount of damage with net trap. We also have a small amount of caltrop synergy, where we are throwing a bunch of caltrops on the ground, which will also be hits when enemies walk over them. And we also have it so that net hits can't be dodged, which makes it so we can do cannot be dodged maps very easily, right? And essentially, we're just going to go around, throw net traps. Now, the rest of our character is focused on defense. We have a very large amount of offensive capabilities with stuff like Salt the Wound for the crit multi to bleed penetration, right? We have stuff like Blood of the Exile for that massive bleed duration, right? The same thing with Valdir's Chalice for that massive bleed duration. We even have a Flayer's Pride, which is a massive amount of bleed penetration on top of chance to bleed on hit. Same thing with like a decent one-handed axe. And all of that combined means that we will be dealing at the very least, probably like 200 to 300 to 400k ticks on the dummy, something around like that. I'll have to mess around with it in game. This is obviously not like a promise or anything. The patch notes could change everything, and I have not actually played this build in game, so I couldn't really give you an opinion on how it's actually going to feel. But this is what I'm going to be cycle starting. So if you want to keep up with me, I also will be streaming this this build live on Twitch, probably for the remainder of 1.0 for like at least the first week. Also, as well, if you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, by the way. It helps me a lot. But yeah, that is the offensive setup that we have. So we're just going to be throwing punctures, nets, and doing a bunch of hits. One really cool thing is there's a node inside Smoke Bomb here that gives us 200% puncture bleed chance as well. Normally this wouldn't be very useful because puncture as a damage skill itself isn't very what I would call strong. But when you're getting 3 punctures at once with Spear Trap, in theory, right, this will end up being much stronger, as of course we throw net traps, they all bleed, and we can also put, of course, Smoke Bomb down. Smoke Bomb also has a lot of other benefits like cleansing ailments, giving us silver shrouds, and giving us dust shrouds as well to help us give us a lot of free dodge chance that we normally wouldn't have. Now, this dodge chance that we're getting will also actually scale our Trapper's Crescendo as well, so we'll end up doing more damage because of our dodge chance. Now, the first thing that you must be wondering, Dread, you're playing a Falconer. and you don't have falconry. I mean, you don't have falconry spec. Well, that is because a lot of the utilitarian needs of Falcon are just here. They just exist. So you don't have to actually spec into Falcon or to like falconry to get all the benefits. And what do I mean by that? Well, Falcon is going to be an unkillable mob that walks around you and does damage for you. Now, of course, we're not actually scaling the Falcon, but he gives us a lot of interesting benefits. The first things off, he gives us a chance to gain Crimson Shroud when he hits something. This is a massive 50% bleed chance per stack, and also like 6% less damage over time taken per stack or something like that. That is absolutely massive. That will make us much tankier against damage over time, while also giving us a gigantic damage boost. We also get a massive 12% less damage taken while moving, which is great against dots, by the way. And of course, it's doubled if Falcon hits something, right? We also gain a massive 2% armor increase per time Falcon has hit an enemy recently. This means whenever he's like going around and attacking things, we even gain increased armor. So falconry and Falconer can actually be a build without using the Falcon too much, but Falcon just gives so much support in terms of the rest of the tree for this build that we still put it on our bar. And thankfully, thanks to the fact that a lot of stuff is being triggered, like for instance shurikens on our shift, it means that we don't have to actually have falconry specialized. We just can put it on our bar where shurikens would have been, right? So now with falconry out of the way, let's talk about the defensive suite of this build. And let me tell you, it is insane. So as you can tell with my health, that is a lot of health to have as a rogue. Why is that? Well, that is because it turns out there is a lot of HP scaling in rogue now, thanks to Falconer being a thing. Before, when you were playing rogue, you didn't have many options for HP scaling. You had like this node, you had like this node, and like maybe like a few nodes over here. But overall, you did not have many ways of scaling HP. But now we have Falconer, which gives us a massive 80 HP here. We can get HP here eventually. There's like a lot of different ways of getting a bunch of free HP, right? And on top of that, we also get a lot of other defensive benefits, i.e. like armor. So if we go into the Falconer passive tree here, we get a massive 6 flat armor per 2 dexterity. That means that we gain well over 180 flat armor on top of the armor that I already have, which is then multiplied by percent armor from our blessing and everything else, on top of also our falconer giving us percent armor, right? When they hit, we also gain the massive, of course, I think it's like 20% armor or something like that from bladed armor from shurikens, which means of course that will affect all that armor as well. And that is going to make us a very tanky boy, as you know, we have a lot of stuff that gives us armor. We also have Thrones of Ambition, which will make it so we can essentially just face tank T4 Jarla. Now, another thing that's really cool about this is we're actually capped on Glancing Blow with this setup. So right now we're sitting at 55% Glancing Blow, but if we go over to Falconer here, we can convert 100% of our block chance into Glancing Blow. So if we look at our block chance here, we have about 50%. That will cap us on our Glancing Blow, and that's because we have a shield. Now, Flayer's Pride normally isn't a good shield. It's pretty good as an offensive offhand, unironically, right? But it's never really been a good shield. But now, with this here, with that decent amount of block chance we get from this, and also the block chance on all the trees and stuff, it means we can actually cap our Glancing Blow just by equipping a Flayer's Pride, which is insane, as it's the equivalent of dual wielding. Like, this is the equivalent of like dual wielding an offhanded weapon, right? While also gaining all the benefits of not having to be dual wielding, while also, you know, getting that penetration with bleed, that bleed on hit. Now, that health gain on kill is actually pretty cool. Now, the less damage taken on block and the block effectiveness and all that all doesn't actually like give us anything, right? But everything else does give us stuff, like of course the bleed chance. Essentially, this is like a very fancy offhanded weapon that doesn't make us take like 10% increased damage or whatever the dual wield benefit is these days, right? That means that we can cap Glancing Blow. Why is that important? Well, not only does it give us a massive 35% less damage taken from hits, which is multiplicative with, of course, our armor, it also means that we can benefit from things like health gained when you receive a Glancing Blow. And since we can actually cap our Glancing Blow here, this means whenever we get hit by any hit, we actually gain life whenever we are hit. So if you look at the base tree here, we can gain a massive 32 flat health on Glancing Blow, and then we also gain 19 here if we get an exalted helmet, which this should be pretty easy to get, especially if we're like MG or something like that, which I plan on doing. This means that essentially whenever anything hits us, we gain 50 life back. Now, when we are reducing damage to the point that we are with our current build, where we, have glancing blow, armor stacking, less damage taken while moving, all of this combined means that the small hits, they're not going to hit us that much. And this is just a direct way of reducing the amount of damage that we're taking. So if a bunch of archers hit us, that's just 50 flat HP every single time they hit us, like deducted from their damage. And that is a lot of defensive capabilities. It means that, whenever we're hit, we just shrug it off like it's nothing, right? And then, of course, we have stuff like Valdir's Chalice, which not only gives us a lot of physical damage over time bleed, right? We also gain a massive health gained on kill per second bleed on the target, meaning that we're always going to either be at 100% HP or at 0 HP. So all of that combined leads to a very chonky character. And we can do stuff like exalted acid flask for throwing attack speed. That'll be kind of amusing to actually abuse a level of acid flask without actually using acid flask, right? And like, this is the beauty of Falconer, not actual falconry, but the fact that we can play a rogue build without having to chop our limbs off to go dual wielding or having to do low life to be tanky, stuff like that. Like, we can get tanky without having to do any of that. Even our idols are absolutely insane. We can run physical damage over time % idols while also getting increased HP. These will be a dime a dozen probably when MG comes around, right? Like, I'll be able to probably purchase a few of these pretty easily, right? The stuff like Thorn Slinger, like just get a bunch of HP, then extra bleed chance on hit and movement speed. By the way, we're gonna have an insane amount of movement speed with this build. So not only are we gonna have haste on hit with all these sources, right? We're also going to have increased haste effect. So we're going to be gaining like 24% increased movement speed on haste. We also get another 6% here. So it's like 30% movement speed you don't see here. There's also the movement speed on shift as well. And then there eventually we can, later on in the league, when we eventually get it, we can get some movement speed on our Bloodly Exiles, which means we can go even faster. We can get LP on all this stuff. And overall, this build is actually going to be absolutely poggers amazing. For leveling, what I'm going to do the stereotypical puncture, right? Puncture into Umbral Blade setup until I can get net traps set up, and then we'll be playing net traps all the way through. So if you want more of a in-depth leveling guide on that, I might make one, or you can go to Maxroll and just use like whatever like Falconer leveling guide they'll have on day one. Now, with all that being said, this has been Dread. Off to wait for 1.0 and patch notes. We'll see if patch notes actually change this or not. Bye.